it just it's recording now, and I just want to
Hmm.
make sure they always still fine with being recorded. No issue with that. Mute.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Yes, definitely.
So why don't we start off? And when you're answering the questions, I know it's a little difficult, but if you could look
Okay.
at the camera,
Should I be looking at the camera while you're asking them?
um, as long as you answer to the camera,
Okay.
like really, that won't really make a difference in my head in terms of post production.
Hmm.
So yeah, whatever you're comfortable with. I always tell people that, and they always end up just looking at me. So if you do that, it's also not the end of the world.
Okay.
But so let's start off and just say your name and a sentence about your background.
My name is Abigail Pruden, and I am a high school student here in Gainesville, Florida. And I have always loved the environment. I've always loved being outside. Um, and I'm very, very passionate about protecting the environment and protecting our community.
What kind of work do you do at the high school level with the environment?
So I'm the president of my environmental conservation organization club, and we do a variety of activities around campus. We have a campus tree walk. We're planting some gardens this year, which is very exciting. And in terms of climate, our policy committee has started working on a green schools campaign. So basically, we're working towards passing a resolution that commits the school to clean energy. So that is in the beginning stages right now. We're still identifying our target audience, allies. We're doing a lot of research. So those are the main items that I've been working on.
I think it's one thing to be interested in climate policy, and it's another thing to actually, take action and do something with that, right? As the president of your school's environmental club, what made you want to take that jump?
Um, I think action is the hard part because so many of us care and so many of us want to do something, but we lead busy lives and we have all these other things, all these prior commitments oftentimes going on. So it can be tricky to actually make that jump. I mean, I think being president, holding a role doesn't necessarily mean anything. um, I think it's about taking action on that. And I think I've really found a lot of strength in the other students at my school and in my club who are interested in helping the environment. And, I've always wanted to take action. And it's just once you take one action, once you start taking actions, it's really empowering. Even if you don't see, even if you don't really see that result, it's it's a very empowering feeling to take one small action, and it pushes you to go further. Whether that's educating your peers, whether that's starting to actually look at policy, um, just starting is the key, I think.
Well, you mentioned some of your friends and peers who are in that club. How important is that sense of community to you?
I think it's hugely important because it can be difficult to go out there on your own um, and advocate for the causes you believe in. It's incredibly admirable, but at the same time, it can be hard, and it can be um, your voice is much louder when you raise all your voices together. So, and it's also just really inspiring to see that others are also committed to a healthier world, and that there are peers who want to make the impact that I want to make, and also, especially the younger kids in the club who will continue to carry on that legacy and carry the torch.
Well, you mentioned younger people in the club,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're a high school student. How different has it been coming uh, and trying to address climate issues and environmental issues as a younger person? Because obviously for a lot of older people it's different. They have a lot more experience. Like, how is being a young person defined your role in environmental justice?
I almost feel like that makes it. I mean, I can't. It's hard to speak to since I've only ever been a young person, but I think it's it's not as hard being a young person as you might expect. In fact, I think it can be easier being young in the climate movement because there are so many organizations that are geared toward young people. And actually, I feel like there's a really strong base of younger folks who are involved. Um, I think, but I do think that's actually one of the issues that should be addressed within climate justice and climate advocacy is there's this age gap because we have a lot of youth activists and then we have a lot of older activists who are retired, which makes sense. And throughout history, that that has played out since you know youth don't have those job commitments, and if you're already retired, obviously you're not committed to a job. So in those middle age ranges, I feel like um, there is there are some organizations that are like exclusive to youth and exclusive to older folks, um, which I think is very, very valuable. But I think it's also important to include the middle generations.
So I want to move on a little bit and
Mm-hmm.
talk about your work specifically, right?
Yeah.
As a person, as the president of your club, what's something small in your life, in your work, that has made a very big impact when it comes to the environment and made a big impact in, what you're trying to do as an
Mm-hmm.
advocate?
I think big impact can be a hard phrase to look at because what is a big impact? Like, is you know I didn't help pass the Inflation Reduction Act. Like, you know I didn't commit all of Florida to clean energy by 2050. So it can feel like, well, I've really only made small impacts, but really those small impacts do add up to a larger impact. And I think um, one one really powerful scenario that I felt that I had made, um, to me it felt really meaningful, and I think it's looking at progress, instead of like simply how much of an impact, like just that we are continuing that inertia. Um, but when I was in 10th grade, I think, um, I was part of the Community Action Projects for the Environment, and we helped advocate for preserving several of Gainesville's trees downtown. The city was planning to remove them because of trip and fall lawsuits, and there was a lot of discussion about it. There was a lot of public outcry, and our group showed up. We had um, about 8 youth there, and our supporting adults, and we spoke at that meeting, and we spoke on the importance of preserving these trees for their shade quality, for their cooling effect, for the heritage that they have in that downtown area, and we talked about alternative ways that they could address the issue of mobility and getting around the sidewalks, and the roots were disrupting the sidewalk basically. So we suggested root trimming, and there were 13 other public comments. So that was really powerful to see how many other people there were. But what was even more powerful was initially they were planning on taking these trees out. That was like the plan. Um, but they decided to that motion was rescinded, and later on they decided to save all of those trees. So that was really incredible to see that our advocacy had been a part of that. And it wasn't a huge thing, but it was a move in the right direction. And not only that, it made us realize. I mean, I definitely realized like that advocacy actually does work. They do actually. Our representatives do actually listen to us, and I think um, we do have a lot of supportive representatives in this specific area. And even if your representative doesn't agree with you, their job is to listen to you. They will listen to you, even though in our highly politicized climate, it can feel really difficult to have that conversation. It's important to have that conversation because even if they disagree with you, they their job is to represent you, so they will listen.
I really like the example you gave a second ago where you talked a little bit about how we shouldn't measure our success in, the necessarily all the big scale things. We should measure our success in terms of progress, right? And these smaller things that we can do and the smaller things that we can get done. Because I think the example you gave was a great example of progress. It was,
Mhm.
you advocating to protect the trees in downtown Gainesville, and that's what ended up happening.
Mhm.
In terms of, here in Alachua County on the local level, right?
Yeah.
What kind of progress are you looking for? Like, what is it that you want to see happen? Like, what are you working towards now?
I think currently, like my more specific focus is at my school level. It's a pretty small school. It's a pretty small community, um, but being able to make progress on that front and to pass commitments um, at my school, that's a great stepping stone for further action. Um, and more broadly, um, I think it's really important that we look at not only the environmental side of things, but how increased heat, how um, higher intensity hurricanes are impacting our communities, and especially in lower income areas, um, how we can support them, and not just fighting for climate resolutions and climate and environment, you know, legislation, but also bringing in the communities that are the most affected and listening to them really, um, and getting their opinions.
So you talked a little bit about climate resolutions at your
Mm-hmm.
school. Have you faced any resistance to those, programs and projects? Like, well, what does that resistance look like?
Well, to be entirely honest, we're just starting. Like we have not. We are still in the researching stages. We haven't started reaching out to the decision makers as of yet. And we're not. This is a somewhat long term goal. Um, the end of the school year is only 2 months away, so we're trying to continue this into next year. And I think the my prediction is that the biggest resistance we will face will be on the basis of funding, because I know that our environmental group and previous clubs in the past have advocated for solar panels and different environmentally friendly actions that have been nixed because of um, funding. So I think that's probably going to be our biggest issue. That's what I predict. Um, but I mean, that remains to be seen. So I'm excited to get going, and I think you know resistance is to be expected, but I think we are definitely going to be able to overcome it, and we may need to make some compromises in order to get that resolution passed. But that's okay. Some progress is better than none.
I think a lot of times when I think about, activism from young people, a lot of times we hear over and over again that, young people are too young, they're too inexperienced, that kind of resistance, people, not believing in you just because, you're not as experienced as other people. How do you approach that? How do you tackle that?
I mean, young people have always been at the forefront of movements for justice and for the environment. I mean, I think this has always been a point of resistance, but I think what uniquely positions young people to advocate for climate justice and for environmental justice is that this is our future. We are going to be here long after our current decision makers have left the earth. So I think we don't have to be experts. We have to know our stuff for sure. We, you know, you have to know what you're talking about. You have to do your research. But I think also increasingly in this digital age, um, there is more accessibility to um, a lot of science and research that's out there. There are also a lot more traps and a lot more ways to be misled. So I think arguing that young folks are not equipped to address these issues simply on the basis of inexperience um, isn't really supported, because we can do our research and we understand what's going on. We understand the gravity of these issues, and we understand that we're already being impacted by climate change. Our children will be even more impacted by climate change. We want to create a beautiful, livable future, and that's what we're fighting for.
If you could create one rule for the future about how to, make a greener future that everyone had to follow, what would it be?
I gotta think a bit about this one. um, there are so many different rules that you could have. You could say no more fossil fuels. You could say everything reused. No more production of plastics. But ultimately, no matter what is physically going on in the world, what maintains a positive um, system, or what can reconstruct a negative system, is our minds. So I think the one rule would be being conscious of your decisions and being conscious of how everything you do in your daily life impacts the environment, impacts those around you. Um, I think that would solve a lot of problems.
I thought that was a great answer, actually. Wow. Um, so another difficult question, right? If you had to describe your work in a metaphor, what would that metaphor be?
I think, here in this area, in the winter, we have tons of sandhill cranes flying over, and they fly in this V-shaped pattern, and there are quite a lot of them, um, but they're all flying together in the same direction, helping each other fly in unity. And while they're all flying in the same direction, they each have a little sway. They each push and pull a little bit as they move through the air. And I think that what I've begun to do, and what I hope to continue doing, and what I will continue doing, is to be one of those sandhill cranes pushing that V in the direction of a clean, livable, just future for everyone.
So, looking 10 years down the line,
Mm-hmm.
what's one piece of advice that you'd want to give to your older self?
I think focus on what's important. Never lose sight what of your values, of what you stand for, but also be open to new ideas. And um, I think work hard, play hard, and keep a clear mind. Have fun, but aggressively pursue climate justice. Um, I feel kind of almost like I haven't actually done that much in terms of climate activism and climate justice. So I think, like, I'm just at the beginning, um, and I really want to spend more time fighting for what I believe in, and I have the luxury of doing that. A lot of people don't. So I think continuing to acknowledge that, and continuing to try to uplift the voices of others as much as possible.
Has there been like a specific piece of advice or piece of wisdom that someone has given you or that you've seen that has kind of inspired you and led you on your journey?
There's so much inspiration out there. You know, both in our physical community, there's so many amazing people doing amazing work, um, and also in the right corners of the internet, you have some really inspirational um, figures. Personally, I'm very inspired by Scott Martinez. His work on his lifelong environmentalism and climate justice. So I think if there's one piece of advice that was kind of what did it for me, it was just get started. I don't even know where I heard that, but I think when I realized just do something and realize that it's okay if it feels really slow at the beginning. Like some of the things I'm working on in my environmental club, it feels so slow, and I'm like, I wish this could go so much faster. But it's okay if it feels slow at the beginning. It's gonna feel slow, and don't let that get in your way. You'll slowly build momentum, and that's what matters.
I think for a lot of people right now, to say that climate justice feels slow is pretty accurate. Um, I think not only for people does it feel slow sometimes people might think that we're arguably going in the wrong direction. Uh, so to people who feel like that, I think hope is something that's extremely important to them, and hope
Mm-hmm.
is something that's really strong and that drives people forward. What gives you hope for the future?
What gives me hope is love. Like, love is hope, and hope is love. I think the love of family and friends, but also the love that the earth gives us. I mean, it's incredible how resilient nature is, and how, you know, even after the land is completely denuded, life comes back. Life keeps coming back. So ultimately, I would say it's it's life. It's being out in nature and knowing that I belong, among the trees. So that's what inspires me and what gives me hope.
Well, I want to talk specifically, not about, but to young
Mm-hmm.
people now, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure there are a lot of people who have similar stories to you. There are a lot of people who, are in high school and middle school, elementary school, even, who really do care about the nature all around us, right? What's your advice to them? Like, what's your advice to young people who maybe want to get involved or people who've already
Mm-hmm.
gotten involved? What's your message?
Number one, talk about it. Talk about it with your peers. Talk about it with your teachers, your family. Um, you know, just bring it up. Ask questions. Ask, what do you think? And perhaps even more importantly, don't be discouraged. I think oftentimes, especially with younger kids, it's like, aw, look at them doing their climate activism. How cute. And I mean, generally, I feel like there's a condescending attitude towards children in our society, which don't let that discourage you. Like, know that when you're taking action, you're doing important work. You're not just having fun. And yeah, you're preparing for your future, and it's a great learning opportunity. Um, but you are contributing, and you are a crucial part of the climate movement.
What about young people who aren't actively interested in climate change, whether it be, maybe they're hesitant about believing, in environmental issues, or they're just not motivated to want to get involved?
I think, I mean, that's tricky. I mean, what I've found is that a lot of young folks, at least my peers um, in my school and the people I interact with, they have a a decent level of education on environmental issues, and they do care, but I think it's like, darn, like, that sucks. Like, what am I gonna do? I think to some extent there is a level of apathy, but to another, there's a degree of not feeling like we have power, when in reality, we do have power. We just have to assert that we have power, um, and make our voices heard. Um, I think it is also tricky because, if you're a citizen, it's easier to do that, and if you're not a citizen, especially in these times, that can be harder. But I think just, I think also there are so many negative stories out there about climate change, um, and it can just be like very, very discouraging and very kind of not kind of very depressing. Um, so I think people just kind of look away and try not to burden themselves with that. Um, I think what's hugely important, and a lot of what's missing from education, is being outside and just like being in nature. Um, because I feel like when you're in surrounded by all this abundance of life, and you realize that there are so many threats to it, you feel a much more personal tie. Um, it's a complex question. I think there are a lot of people who do care. They just don't know what to do. Um, I think there are a lot more people who fall into that category than we would think. I think that the perception may be that there's just a lot of apathy and a lot of people just don't care. But I think it's not easy to to express. I mean, expressing your opinion is one thing, but to actually express it to the people who are going to act on it and affect policy, um, yeah, I don't think I really have a good answer to that.
You spoke a little bit about education and people getting educated about environmental issues. What's the best way to do that?
Um, Sorry, I was about to sneeze. I think, I mean, part of that is peers educating each other. Um, at my school, we always have an Earth Day event, where we have like poster boards. We invite other clubs to, it's part fundraising, but it's the goal of it is awareness. So we have our eco club members make poster boards about, you know nutrient pollution, tree identification, like a variety of things, not only about environmental issues, but also just about um, components of the ecosystem in general. Um, so part of it comes, I think, on students who already are involved in environmental activities and already passionate about these issues, um, educating each other. And I think also, um, just having outdoor classroom spaces is important, and offering environmental science courses in high school, obviously, um, is one way to do it, yeah, and in middle school. And I think there's so many different ways to tie it into existing curriculums, especially with elementary school. So I think it really takes like a couple people who are like, um, we believe this would be really beneficial for this school, for my school, for your school, whoever it is. Um, I mean, it's better if it comes from within the school, I think, because they know the community. But there, I mean, there could be like legislative actions that say high schools are required to offer an environmental science course. I'm not super duper familiar with the education legislative world, but I mean, at this point, I think coming from within the community is the best approach. Okay. Wow. Is your
Let
phone
me
okay?
reorient it to make sure it's right. The window's bad, but the angle was great before.
Okay. Wow. It's exciting.
Nature saying it might be time to wrap up.
Yeah.
Well, I actually do only have one more question.
Okay.
Um, it's well before we wrap up. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, like to share, anything that you'd want to throw out there?
Um, I think now more than ever, it's crucial to make our voices heard, and to not be discouraged and realize that we are the hope, that we can come to positive changes, even that even with a lot of struggle, that it's possible. um, Keep yourself educated, of course, and I think also, if when you're passionate about something, it's so easy to well, I wouldn't say so easy, but um, it's important to educate yourself. But I think a lot of us want to take that next step and actually do something. That's the hard part, doing something. So I think even just speaking to your local officials, doing some research on what kinds of local provisions there are in terms of climate policy, what provisions are possibly in the works, and then voicing your support, or if there are provisions that could potentially be harmful, voicing your opposition. Just taking that first step is what'll get you rolling. Is what my experience has been.
Well, thank you. So